Hello. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the list of historic Welsh place names and where we are with it 4 years on from its launch. So to start off, I'm going to talk about why it was felt that we needed such a thing in Wales and the sources we used in compiling it originally, so that it was ready at launch. And then I'm going to move on to talking about the ways that the list is used by Welsh Government and local government and other interested bodies, and then finish up by talking about some of the sources that we have used since launch into creating the list in its current form, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the future. So, to start off with, why was it felt that we needed a list of place names in Wales? Well, you're no doubt all aware that the loss of historic Welsh place names is something of a burning topic in Wales. And there are some particularly egregious examples of this, which I'm sure you've come across at least some of them before. The most famous being Happy Donkey Hill, or Vair Fach, to give it its correct name, which is a farm just outside Llandysul in Ceredigion. And Vair Fach is a place name that's attested for at least 500 years and is almost certainly considerably older than that. We have records of it going back 500 years. And in common with all Welsh place names, it means something. Vair Fach tells us that there was a nobleman's court here, if you like. Whether one of the local nobility possibly, or maybe it was a subsidiary court of the princes of Deheubarth. We're not entirely sure, but it's obviously a significant landholding. Happy Donkey Hill, conversely, tells us that a particularly happy donkey lives there, which isn't quite the same. Also from Ceredigion, we have Mountain Sea View, which is a farm called Bwlcheinion, which is next to Blaen Einion in Cwm Einion in the north of Ceredigion. And so you can see that the name is linked in with the rest of the valley and the other place names there. Einion's the name of the river. And what happened here was that the farmer was looking to diversify a bit and decided to open a glamping site. Fine. But he was worried that tourists wouldn't come on holiday to anywhere called Bwlcheinion because they wouldn't be able to pronounce it. Which, as you'll know, is why France and Italy do not have a tourist industry. Because, of course, people certainly can't pronounce any names in French or Italian. Anyway, so he decided that because it was up a mountain and with a sea view, he would change the name to Mountain Sea View. And then finally from Ceredigion we have Cwm Tyddi, which, for those of you who don't know, is a village on the coast. It's really rather a nice place to go and visit. And Visit Wales had the rather excellent idea, to be fair to them, of getting a young couple to walk the coastal path and blog about what they saw and what they did every day, which is a great idea. Anyway, when they reached Cwm Tyddi, they they were doing a bit of research and they found a website on the internet which was written by someone from Birmingham who had once seen a seal at Cwm Tyddi, and so decided to call the place Seals Bay, which unfortunately our bloggers took to mean that Seals Bay was an alternative name for Cwm Tyddi, which it isn't. It has never been called Seals Bay ever, except by this one bloke from Birmingham. Now, luckily, when Visit Wales put this latest blog up, I happened to see it almost instantly and was able to message them and say, look, you completely just made up this place name, please don't do this. And they, changed the blog, and so, Cwm Tiddy is still definitely Cwm Tiddy. But the problem with this sort of thing is that, once it's on the internet, people see it. And if the BBC get hold of it, they'll, obviously think, Seals Bay is obviously the English name for Cwm Tiddy, so in all of their English language output, they'll call the place Seals Bay and not Cwm Tiddy. And then the Ordnance Survey will, next time they're redoing the maps, will see, Seals Bay is in regular use as a name, so Seals Bay will appear on the maps, and then gradually you're left in a situation where the only people still referring to Cwm Tiddy as Cwm Tiddy are Welsh-speaking locals. I've also got some examples from the north of the country. Plas Glyn Shifon, just outside Caernarfon. It's sort of one of the major gentry houses of the northwest, and it was for sale, and the new owner and the person selling it decided to market it under the name Wimborne Hall, on the basis that places with Welsh names don't sell. And then we have Chwarel Llechwedd in Blaen y Ffestiniog. Llechwedd is it's a former quarry, and it's now in use as a sort of outdoor activities site. And the company running it decided, as we've seen time and time again, that Llechwedd was far too hard for the poor tourists to say, and thus they would of course not go there on holiday. And so they decided to change the name to Slate Mountain, which, and this is true in all of these examples, prompted a local outcry. And so the company sort of rethought this and decided, right, okay, no, we've listened to what the locals think. Obviously, the community's views are very important, so we'll give it a bilingual name. We'll call it Slate Mountain in English, and then they Googled Slate Mountain in Welsh, and came up with the name Mynydd Llechi, which they sort of very proudly presented to the locals, who of course turned around and said, no, look, that's what Llechwedd means. However, so you can see that this is a serious problem, and it's occurring all across Wales. A positive thing to be said is that in each of these circumstances, public pressure locally led to the names of the properties being retained in each case. Happy Donkey Hill is the name of the business, Fawrdre Fach is the name of the house, and it's the same with Bwlcheinion as well. So, public pressure really does work. But because we have all of these examples of historic names being changed all across the country, it was made very obvious to the government that something needed to be done. And the something that was done is the Historic Environment Wales Act 2016, which, amongst other things, legislated for the creation of a list of historical place names that would enable us to protect and preserve Wales's place name heritage. Now, at launch, back in 2017, the list had 310,000 names approximately, which made it already the largest database of its kind in the world. I mean, Wales is really leading the way with this one. And some other countries are looking at us slightly enviously, actually. The majority of the names in the list at this point dated from the 1840s onwards. So, later names generally. Our definition of historical name is pretty much anything, because of course, names that we collected in 2018, 10 years down the line, are going to be historical, so we don't really have a cut-off point, as it were. But that being said, we did have about 10,000 medieval and, in some cases, earlier names. We've got a couple of names in ancient Greek, for instance. And they came largely from three main sources, which I will now move on to discuss. But this just sort of gives you an idea of, you know, how large the thing already was when we launched. The first source, and the largest, was the Cynefin project, which some of you may have heard of. Now, Cynefin was a project to digitise the 1840s tithe maps and to transcribe all of the information about them. So, you know, this is the tithe map you can see in front of you now, and you'll notice that each field is marked with a number and also a, you know, point to click on. And with the map, you also had a key which would record all of the information about that field. So you'd be able to, you know, check the field number, go straight to the key, and find out, you know, what type of field it was, who owned it, who was working it, what its worth to the tithe was, and crucially, what the name of the field was. And at launch, we had about 200,000 field names from Cynefin. The other nice thing about these maps, they're all available on the National Library website, by the way, lleoedd.llyfrgell, places.library. And the nice thing is you can, you know, they're fully digitised and you can sort of scroll around and see what the country looked like in 1840. So this is Machynlleth, which for those of you who know the town, you can see how much it's changed. You know, we've basically just got sort of the two main streets, and that's about it. Oh, and the Plas down at the bottom there. Now, the second source we used, it was historic mapping again, and again a sort of digitisation and transcription project done by volunteers. And the Cymru 1900 project, which digitised the second edition 1900 OS map. And again, the volunteers wrote down all of the names, as you can see here in this map of Crymych. And whereas Cynefin just gave us field names and the occasional farmhouse, this gives us everything basically. We got a sort of about 100,000 place names from this. And as you can see from the map, you know, we have village names, we have house names, we've got chapel names, river names, pub names, road names in a lot of cases. So this gives us sort of a much wider variety. And then the final sort of main source we had starting off was the Centre for Advanced Welsh and Celtic Studies Place Names database, which was very generously given to us on launch. And this is where we get all the medieval names from. And as I said, the interesting thing about these, of course, is that, you know, whereas the names from Cynefin and Cymru 1900 are almost, you know, they're in Welsh or they're in English, basically. Whereas the medieval names, of course, lots of them are in Welsh and lots of them are in English, but others are in Latin or Anglo-Norman. And as I said earlier, there's a couple in ancient Greek as well. So, for instance, the picture you can see here, that this is the Book of Llandaf, and this is where they're listing all of the Llandeilors, and of course they're writing in Latin. So you have, you know, Llandeilo Gresinich written down in Latin. And this is an important thing to note. You know, I've talked a lot about Welsh language place names already, but it's not just Welsh language place names, it's place names in Wales. And obviously the majority of those are going to be in Welsh, and then, you know, a lot in English as well. But we're also collecting forms in other languages. So, you know, starting off with, you know, Latin, Greek, Anglo-Norman, and Anglo-Saxon in some cases, we got from this source. Now, obviously, the work has progressed, and since launch, these are our current stats. So as you can see, we've had sort of 373,946 individual sessions, which means that an average of about 385 people are logging onto the website every day, which is, for a website like this, is huge. And 276,397 individual people have used the website. They've left 61 comments. There's a comments box on the bottom of every single recorded name. And, you know, some of these are, you know, oh, I used to live here. Quite a lot of them obviously are, you know, what does this mean? And sometimes you get a sort of interesting little tidbit of knowledge about the place. So it's, you know, it's well worth looking and, you know, commenting yourself if you know something about the name in question. We also have a contact form where you can send us inquiries about pretty much anything. And if you also happen to have a, you know, a list of place names from your area hidden in the loft, this is where you send it in to us, and please do. We've had 207 inquiries since launch. Now, as you can see from the slide here, it's referring to, you know, the English website and the Welsh website, because the website is entirely bilingual. In effect, it's two websites. You can flick between Welsh and English at any point, and absolutely everything can be done in either language. You know, there's nothing you can do in English that you can't do in Welsh, and there's nothing you can do in Welsh that you can't do in English. So it's entirely bilingual. And Kaisa Nicholas, which is a field in Anglesey, is the most popular place name on the Welsh language website. Not sure why. Don't know why it's quite so interesting. And Carreg y Blythe, which is a farm by Cerrig y Drudion in Denbighshire, is the most popular place name on the English website. So as you can see, there's a bit of difference between the two websites. We find that people using the website in Welsh are much more interested in the project itself, and they're reading the About page and they're reading the blog and, you know, things like that, whereas people using the website in English, they're just interested in the place names. Of which, as you can see from the slide, we now have 680,073 of those. So you can see there's been a huge growth over the past 4 years. And we have a current running total of 1,234 different sources. You know, some of those are huge, like Cynefin, and some of those are individual members of the public sending in their house name, which, if you are looking on the website and you find we don't have your house name, please send it in. It's important that we collect as much as possible. So I'll now move on to discussing the sources that we've used since launch. The first one that went in after launch was the place names data from the county inventories. Now, when the Royal Commission was first founded, our original job, the Royal Commission if you like, was to create a list of absolutely everything that was of any historical interest in the entirety of Wales. And this being the Edwardian period, we did this by basically writing sort of, you know, massive, weighty, scholarly volumes on a county-by-county basis. And in the first 5, which is Carmarthenshire, Denbighshire, Meirionydd, Pembrokeshire and Montgomeryshire, we also collected place name data, as you can see here on this page, from Llansteffan in Carmarthenshire. And this was put into the list by some student interns from the history department at Aberystwyth University. And as you can see, when we collected the place name data originally, we also recorded some sort of interesting historical information about it. And the interns also recorded this on our database. So when you click on any one of these names, there's about, on average, about 200 from each county. You'll be able to sort of, you know, scroll down the page, and there's a sort of a notes box, and that's where you'll find the sort of interesting tidbit of information. Now, in some cases, the interesting information is we don't know why this is called this. For instance, there's a farm in Montgomeryshire called Maes y Gard, which means battlefield. And our interesting bit of information is there is no evidence that there was ever a battle here. But There we are. And then this is the first source that I personally added to the list shortly after I was employed. This is the list of Welsh parishes found in Penarth manuscript 147. Now, this list was compiled by a fascinating character called William Dafydd Llywelyn from Llangynyder in Breconshire. And he was a travelling physician, a somewhat indifferent poet, and he was also a recusant. That is to say that he was Catholic at the time when being Catholic was illegal. And for whatever reason, in 1570 or thereabouts, he decided that he was going to compile a list of every parish in Wales. And in his work as a physician, he made a sort of a network of contacts all across Wales. And so basically what he did is he got them to tell him the names of all of the parishes in their part of the country. Now, the interesting thing with this, of course, is that there was no standard form of Welsh. There was no standard spelling at the time. So what you have here is people from, let's say Anglesey, telling William Dafydd the name in Anglesey Welsh, and him hearing it and writing it down in Breconshire Welsh. So there's some interesting dialectical things going on here. And then I'm not sure how good his English was, because when he came to the parts of the country that were English speaking in 1570, which is basically South Pembrokeshire and the Gower, he obviously struggled somewhat with the English names. So you get sort of English names rendered into Welsh phonetics. So Yerbaston in Pembrokeshire becomes Yerbaston, and then you get some names that he's obviously sort of tried to work out, what this bizarre gibberish is, and what must the proper name be. For instance, there's a village in Pembrokeshire called Freystrop, and the name he records for it is Freystad Gam. And as far as I'm aware, William Dafydd, and now myself, because I'm a bit weird, are the only people in Welsh history to have ever referred to Freystrop as Freystad Gam. Because what he's done there is he's tried to sort of work out, what the Welsh would be. So he's taken Frey as the Welsh word Freystad, and strop was apparently an English word at the time, meaning a sort of a hop or a jump, so he translated that as cam, so then you get Freystad Gam. And wonderfully, when he got to Walwyn's Castle, he obviously completely gave up, and it's recorded as Wallisbattle, which I think is just, what are these sounds? Then we moved on to Edward Llwyd's Parochialia. Now, for those of you who don't know, Edward Llwyd was one of those wonderful people who were around in the 18th century, who was interested in absolutely every single possible thing you could imagine. He was a historian, he was a linguist, he was a botanist, he invented Celtic studies as an academic discipline in his spare time, as you do. And when he was curator of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, he decided that he was going to write the sort of natural history of Wales. And as part of his research, he wrote to every single vicar in the country and sent them a long list of, it's a questionnaire basically, a long list of questions about their parish. What language or languages are spoken here, what fuel do you burn, what's the topography of the area like, are there any valuable minerals, what types of names are people called. There's a lot of women in Cwm Nedd called Lleucu in this period apparently. And are there any interesting place names? in the area. Now, they didn't all write back, and not all of the correspondence survives, unfortunately, but enough does survive that it was published in Archaeologia Cambrensis in 3 volumes in 1908, and we've been going through them. Now, just to give you a sort of an idea of the scope of what survives, we've got returns for almost every parish in Flintshire and Denbighshire and Meirionydd, bits in Ceredigion and Glamorgan and Radnorshire, and almost nothing for Anglesey. You know, so it's very sort of patchy, unfortunately. But you know, this is sort of the area around Lampeter, and as you can see, there's a fairly decent spread in that part of Ceredigion. So 218 names from Ceredigion all told. And as you can see here, we're about a third of the way through the 3rd volume, and we've got 5,167 names out of it. Now, the interesting thing about the Parochialia is that they didn't just record the names. You know, you also get sort of the names of, you know, who lived in the house, who they were related to, you know, who they'd inherited it from. So it's an absolute goldmine for genealogists. And there's also sort of interesting, you know, other bits about the names. Like there's a farmhouse on the road into Llanrwst from the south, where it's recorded that in 1698 the farm workers were digging in one of the fields, and they found a huge piece of green marble with sort of white flecks, and they, you know, dug it up and they made a table out of it and they put it in the farmhouse. And the house is still there, and every time I drive past, I desperately want to call in and say, can I look at your kitchen table, please? But I haven't quite plucked up the courage yet. Anyway, moving back to field names, Menteriaeth Sir Benfro, so, you know, the body responsible for promoting the Welsh language in Pembrokeshire, ran a project a couple of years ago where they were collecting field names in the north of the county, and it was advertised in all the local Papur a Bro. You know, huge success there. You know, loads of names in. You know, the project really worked out well. And then they thought, you know, great, we've got all these names, but what do we do with them now? So there they were in a desk in a drawer in their office. And then I happened to be down in Crumich giving a talk like this one. And at the end, a bloke raced up to me and said, I've got 1,600 field names from Pembrokeshire. Do you want them? To which the response was, of course, yes, please, wonderful, brilliant. And so a week later, a package arrives in the office, and it's the field names. And I thought, absolutely fantastic. But I was very busy at the time and couldn't do anything with them myself. So there they sat in a drawer in my desk for a couple of weeks. And I thought this was ridiculous. And I contacted one of my former students, and I said, look, do you want an exciting research opportunity in a Welsh language heritage institution? And she said, oh yeah, fantastic, brilliant. And I said, great, I can't pay you, of course. Anyway, bless her, she agreed to turn up anyway, and I got her to, you know, go through the names and upload them to the list. And as you can see from this rather nice picture here, it was effectively a second tithe map. You know, you had a map like this with the fields numbered and colour coordinated, so you knew which farm was which, and then a list of each individual name. And so she was able to just, you know, go through them, plot them on the map, and you know, upload them like that. So, you know, as you're scrolling over Pembrokeshire, you'll notice that, you know, in a lot of cases in the north of the county, we've got 2 names for each field. We've got the 1841 tithe name and the modern name. And, you know, sometimes they're the same and other times they're not. Sticking in Pembrokeshire, we've also been using B.G. Charles's magisterial work on the place names of Pembrokeshire. and we had some more interns working on this. We've been very lucky in interns, in fairness. And so far they've added just over 1,500 names to the list, mostly in Eglwyswrw, Bayville and Dinas, which is in the north of the county. And just to give you an idea of how many names there are in this book, they're up to about page 35 of the first volume. So this is going to be keeping us going quite a while. Now, returning to the website itself, it's worth noting that we have sort of two classes of names, if you like. We have head names and recorded names. And, you know, the recorded names will be, for instance, Carmarthen, or, well, Caerfyrddin / Carmarthen. You know, so that's the official name in Welsh and in English. And then the recorded names are the various forms of that name that we've collected. So, you know, places with a head name will be your towns, you know, your villages, tithe subdivisions, cummuds, cantrevs, that kind of thing. And as you're scrolling around the map, you'll notice, as you can see from the top slide, that the head names jump out at you immediately. And if you want to see the recorded forms of each head name, you simply scroll in, and as you can see from the Carmarthen example, you'll see a circle with a number in it, and you click on that, and then this wonderful snail of recorded forms will open up for you, and you can click on each one and see what they are. And, you know, sometimes, as you can see from Carmarthen, we've got loads of names, and in other cases, as with Abergwyli, we don't have quite so many, but we're adding to them all the time. And to give you an idea of sort of just how dense the coverage of place names we have is, this is the parish of Isagareg in Montgomeryshire. And for those of you who don't know the area, this is basically the bit between the border with Ceredigion and Machynlleth. So it's only a couple of miles square, and it's mostly mountain. You know, there's two, well, there's, you know, one village and one hamlet, basically. That's about it. And we've got over 400 names just for this tiny patch of land, as you can see. So this, hopefully this gives you an idea of just how dense our coverage of place names all across Wales is, because, you know, this is very typical. You know, it's not a sort of a example of a parish that we've sort of done and completed or anything. This is about how things are. But, you know, what kind of an effect is this having in the real world? You know, is all of this helping to save our place name heritage? And the short answer to that is yes. These are sort of the latest stats we've got from some of the councils about the list's impact. Now, when you want to change the name of your house, if it's a historic name, what's supposed to happen is the council is supposed to write to you with a sort of an information pack explaining about, you know, the Welsh language and the importance of historic names, and they ask you very kindly to rethink your decision. And then you have a cooling off period, and after that, well, you know, if you absolutely want to change the name, you know, it's your property. But then the previous name, the historic name, comes into the list. So even if it isn't on the house sign anymore, it's still remembered and it's still recorded. To give you an idea of kind of how much success we're having with this, to start off with Gwynedd, basically about 50% of people are reconsidering, which doesn't sound great, but once you drill down into the figures, what you can see is that basically all across Gwynedd, people are, when they get this information back, they realise, oh, I didn't understand. I can see why this is important. Of course I'll keep the historic name of my house, except in Abersoch, which I think will surprise nobody from Gwynedd. And in Ceredigion, as you can see here, we've got 10 English names being changed to Welsh and 1 Welsh name being changed to English. And of new names, completely new names being given to houses, 230 were in Welsh and 11 were in English, and that's as of 2020. And what this tells us is it's a pattern we actually see all across the country. You do get these huge headline cases of names being lost, like Happy Donkey Hill. But the actual story on the ground is the other way round. It's generally more Welsh names replace English names than English names replace Welsh names. As you can see from POUs there, 2017 to 2019, 70 names were changed, and most of those were English to Welsh. Anglesea's seen an improvement since the new policy came in, so that's good. Caerphilly and Newport, this isn't happening. They're not losing Welsh names. Although in the case of Newport, this is, 1, because it's a city, so fewer houses have names anyway, and 2, because it's been anglicised for quite a while. So, there are just fewer Welsh names there to lose, kind of thing. But Merthyr Tydfil's the interesting one, because, they're not seeing a loss of Welsh names. What they are seeing is that when people buy a house, or, when a new house is built, they want a Welsh name for it. Irrespective of whether they can speak Welsh or not, they want their house to have a Welsh name, which is very interesting. Now, the list is also statutory, and what that means is that local government and developers have an obligation to take the names in the list into consideration when naming or renaming streets and new developments. They're not supposed to just make up names anymore. And so on this slide here you can see a couple of examples of developments, mostly in the southeast in these cases, where we've been contacted by the local council street naming and numbering officer and asked to provide some suitable names. So we give them field names for the fields that the house is being built on, stream names, if there's a name of a sort of particularly prominent rock or anything there, we give them all sorts of things from which they then sort of choose the street names. We also often name for a bridge in Llanmono in Glamorgan. And then bottom middle, that's Fishguard in Pembrokeshire. So this is being used by councils all across the country, which is good to see. And the other aspect of being a statutory list is when things like the Black Lives Matter campaign crop up, and there's lots of things with lots of streets being named after General Picton, for instance, who of course was a slave owner, and understandably people get very angry about this sort of thing, and we have a role to play here too. For instance, when the Senedd discussed this, we were able to brief them and offer sort of expert advice on how the use of the list can avoid these problems in future. Because what you don't want to be in a situation is where you have some sort of fantastic son of the area, Mr. Jones, who has a street named after him because he accomplished something quite so brilliant, and then 20, 30, 40 years down the line, you find out that actually Mr. Jones also had a very sort of dark, sordid side to his character, and you're stuck with Mr. Jones Street all over the town. Whereas, of course, if you use historic names, this isn't a problem, because this field that the street is named after didn't do anything. So it's a very positive use of the list. We can avoid these problems in future by making sure that we use historic names in the naming of, we use place names in the naming of streets. That being said, of course, Picton Street and Mr. Jones Road in this example, they are also historic names because they've been there for centuries and what have you, and they are a part of our history, although obviously in this case rather an unfortunate one. And what the existence of the list allows us to do is to preserve those names in the list. So you won't see them on the street sign anymore, and so for instance, descendants of those owned by General Picton don't have to have that physical reminder every single time they walk down the street. But the names are not lost, so we still have capacity to remember the unfortunate parts of our history, even though, as I say, you're not seeing them in front of you every day. So hopefully with this sort of thing, we're able to preserve history whilst at the same time not flaunting the rather unfortunate bits in people's faces the whole time. Now to come back to Cynefin, we had one of the reasons that the list has grown so vastly over the past 4 years is the fact that we had a second ingest of data from Cynefin, which means that we've now got about 500,000 field names in there. But in a lot of cases with the Cynefin data, people didn't want to write Cae Mawr down 50 times. So what you'll have, as you can see from here, is the liberal use of dittos. And so when we got the second ingest of data, one of the things we did is go through it and take out every single ditto place name before we added the 500,000 in. And this left us with about 20,000 dittos, which I have slowly been going through ever since, because of course you've got to go directly back to the tithe map key and see what should be written in place of the ditto, and you've got to do that for each individual one, so it does take a while. And particularly when a lot of them are house and garden ditto 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 in all of the sort of the villages and the towns, so you have to strip a lot of them out as well. So of that 20,000, there are about 13,000 left, and hopefully they're going to be added into the list very soon, which will at that point mean that we will have at least one name for almost every single field in the entirety of Wales, which is fantastic. One of the other things we're looking to do as soon as it's possible COVID-wise is to run a sort of minor place names collection series of workshops in the Dyfi Valley in Western Montgomeryshire, and collect all of the sort of the current field names, the names of the various little streams all across the valley, the very sort of minor place names from local farmers and people who've been living there for a long time. But obviously that's COVID dependent, so we'll we'll see at what point I actually I'm able to get around to doing that. So this is sort of looking to the future. The Institute for Welsh Estates is working on an estate mapping project at the moment, which the Commission is a partner in, and so they're going to be mapping all of the estate maps from the various sort of big houses all across Wales, and those maps, I mean, in some cases they're very early, from the sort of 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. So they record a lot of detail that's lost on later maps, and once that's ready, we're going to be, taking that data into the list as well. So thanks very much to the Estates Institute there. And then the icon in the middle there, that's the Catholic Record Society. Now, when, for centuries it was illegal in Wales to be Catholic, but this didn't actually stop people being Catholic. And if you, refused to go to your local Anglican church, you were fined, and if you kept doing it, you were put in prison. And what this meant in practical terms was that you needed to find out who the Catholics were and how much land and goods they had to work out how much you could fine them, which led to a huge bureaucracy, to organise all of this, and of course lots of records. And particularly in the case of Wales, it's not enough to know that Mr. Jones is a Catholic, because which one? And so what was recorded is a lot of place names from, sort of the 1530s, well, to 1820 really. These were recorded in the recusant rolls and the pipe rolls. And the Catholic Record Society edited and published all of these in various volumes throughout the course of the 20th century. And they've recently been digitised and put on the Catholic Record Society website. So you can go there and see them free of charge. It's an amazing historical resource. I'd really encourage people to look at it. And of course there's lots of detail about Wales. So another thing we're going to be doing is going through those and recording all of the place names, because of course what you've got here is not just place names from the 16th century, but quite often written down by English clerks who didn't speak Welsh. So you get whatever they felt was the spellings. There's all sorts of fascinating forms in there. And I've alluded several times to members of the public sending us place names. So these are just a few examples of the sort of things we get. On the top left, we've got a map of the field names of Blaenau Allt, which is a farm just outside Pontsian in Ceredigion. And then top right, we have Pen-y-Banc, which is another farm just outside Ffostrasol, again in Ceredigion. So if you find that you have a map of field names, whether it's one you've made yourself, like in the first example, or this slightly more recent one from Pentyrch in Glamorgan, please send it in. It's always fascinating to see which names are the same from the tithe and which name have changed. And in some cases, the names weren't recorded on the tithe, so we do have gaps. So, please send us your field names. And the example on the bottom right from Llanillar in Ceredigion is this was a school project from the 70s, and the student went out and decided that he'd record the field names of sort of 5 of the local farms, which he duly did, and he got high marks, and there it sat in his house until a couple of years ago he got interested in place names again and checked the tithe map. And what he found is about 1 in 3 of the names had changed, even though there'd been no language shift, and in most cases it was the same families who were still farming those farms, but still 1/3 of the names have changed. So it's very important that we get as much information as possible so that we can chart the natural changes in Welsh place names, as well as the unnatural ones. Now, this project is funded by the Welsh Government, and because it's a legislative requirement that we exist, this isn't just going to be over in 5 years and then we move on to the next thing. This is an ongoing work, hopefully my children will be doing this. And so, you know, the more we have, the more place names we can protect. And, you know, names that are in the list, they have a statutory existence and they are protected. So, you know, and they will continue to be protected. So, you know, please send us in your place names, send us your house names, your field names. If you know the name of the stream that runs right on the back of your garden, please send it in. Absolutely everything is important, because, you know, this is working. As you've seen, we are protecting our place name heritage, and we will continue to do so. Diolch yn fawr iawn.